Chapter 28. The Myth of Fingerprints. As Nicholas Power held court in a cavernous wooden shed in Kentville, the art and science of fingerprint analysis had passed through its playful infancy and entered its awkward adolescent phase. The potential of fingerprints in criminal investigations was widely recognized but poorly understood, and the application of the technique in any particular case was still very much a matter of trial and error. The precedents were there. In 1879, police in Argentina used fingerprint analysis to link a bloody thumbprint found on the door of a crime scene to the accused murderer, forever changing the nature of criminal investigation. Eyewitness testimony, long recognized as the least reliable form of evidence, was no longer the only weapon in the prosecutor's arsenal. Thanks to fingerprints, a crime did not need to be seen in order to be solved. 1 year after the Argentines opened the door to a brave new scientific world, Dr. Henry Faulds published the first scholarly work in the burgeoning field of dermatoglyphics, postulating the use of fingerprints as a means of both identifying felons and connecting the perpetrator to a crime scene. Building on Faulds's groundbreaking work, academics used research and anecdotal evidence to bolster the fledgling science of fingerprinting. Advances came fast and furious, and in 1908 Sir Wilfrid Laurier signed Order in Council PC 1614, making fingerprints the official method of identification in Canadian criminal proceedings. While the credit for bringing fingerprints to the courtroom goes to Argentina, Mark Twain deserves kudos for introducing fingerprints to the masses. In 1893, the Century magazine began serializing the adventures of Pudd'nhead Wilson, the latest creation by the venerable humorist. In one of his earliest incarnations, Wilson, a small-town lawyer dismissed by his neighbors as a simpleton, solved a troublesome crime through the use of his strange hobby, the collection and analysis of fingerprints. Although entirely a work of fiction, the serial and subsequent novel highlighted the real-world potential of fingerprints to connect criminals to their crimes. Wildly popular in its day, Pudd'nhead Wilson offered the general public its first tantalizing glimpse into the world of forensic science. Whether or not he was an aficionado of Twain's colorful creation, Nicholas Power understood the probative value of fingerprints in criminal investigations. The detective had used fingerprints before. Contemporaneous with the Wheeler case, Power was embroiled in another very high-profile murder investigation, one that would take him all the way to the United States Supreme Court. On July 21, 1896, an American merchant ship, the Herbert T. Fuller, docked in Halifax. Its crew told a horrific tale as they staggered ashore. While bounding on the high seas, the vessel's captain Charles Nash, his wife Flora, and the second mate, August Blomberg, were viciously hacked to death with an axe. Suspicion quickly fell on a young shipmate, known to his fellows as Charlie Brown. His real name was Justus Leopold Westerberg, and he became the prime suspect when he was seen changing clothes immediately after the murders. Another ensign, Thomas Bram, ordered Westerberg to be shackled, and a search of the ship soon uncovered a bloody axe, presumably the murder weapon. Bram, holding the axe aloft, asked if he should throw it overboard. Another crew member, who feared the actions of a now mutinous crew and thought the axe might once again be used as a weapon, agreed it should be tossed. In a lapse of judgment that would come back to haunt him, Bram threw the axe over the side. As the story spread through town, the Halifax police came on board to take Westerberg into custody. Leading the investigation was none other than Nicholas Power. The detective took the accused into his office to interrogate him, and, oh, what a story Westerberg had to tell! As is a sailor's wont, his tale grew larger with each minute he spent ashore. By the time the interview drew to a close, Westerberg had somehow convinced Power he was innocent and that Bram was the murderer. Despite Westerberg's questionable credibility as a witness, Power believed his version of events. What ultimately convinced the detective was that Bram had disposed of the murder weapon, which of course might have borne fingerprints. The saga of the ill-fated Herbert E. Fuller begs an obvious question: if Power clearly understood the value of fingerprints, why did he not have the prints from the Kempton murder scene analyzed and compared with Wheeler's prints? The answer, at least according to Power, was that there were no fingerprints. When Rodels inquired about prints on the stand, Power denied that any were present at the scene. When defense counsel reminded him of his statements describing bloody handprints and fingerprints visible to the naked eye, Power suddenly could not recall ever mentioning such prints. Despite Power's timely memory lapse, multiple references to bloody and latent fingerprints at the Kempton house appear in the court records. Omer Rice testified to seeing bloody finger marks all over the house, most notably on the bloody spoon, which he identified in court as it was entered into evidence. The well-seasoned Mr. Payne of the St. John Daily Sun also noted many bloody prints during his walkthrough of the crime scene. In addition, Descriptions of the fingerprints can be found in countless other media reports, which, it bears noting, inevitably cited Power as their source. Prints were visible on the 2 knives recovered near the body and on the spoon from the preserves, items that stood as silent witnesses in the courtroom, mere feet from Power as he denied their existence, as well as a pair of bloody handprints on the window. The evidence was plentiful, rendered in sharp relief in the victim's own blood. It does not get any easier than that for crime scene analysts, yet for reasons known only to Nick Power, he dismissed the prints as either non-existent or inconsequential. Power's petulant stance raises 2 disturbing possibilities. The first is that the prints were never collected or tested, making Power grossly negligent in his examination of the crime scene. Under oath, he did admit he had not taken notes or adequately documented the room in which Annie was killed. It therefore stands to reason that he was equally negligent in preserving or documenting the fingerprints, leaving him nothing to compare against Wheeler's prints. The second and far more troubling option is that prints were tested but that no one liked the results. Power might well have collected the prints and compared them against Wheeler's, only to discover the test exonerated the accused. Had the prints confirmed Wheeler's guilt, there was no question the evidence would have been introduced at trial. Since Power had already publicly proclaimed Peter to be the killer on numerous occasions, it would have been professionally devastating for the detective to admit his mistake at so late a juncture in the investigation. In the alternative, it is conceivable he chose to bury any evidence that might have cleared Wheeler's name. So which of these 2 men did Nicholas Power want to be? The incompetent investigator who failed to gather evidence or the conniving liar who destroyed exculpatory evidence? In the end, Power chose none of the above. He took advantage of Ruggles's unfamiliarity with the still-developing science of fingerprints and simply denied their very existence. His lackadaisical approach to crime scene documentation had actually paid off. It was now simply a matter of his word against, well, his own prior words, and as always, Detective Power is on top.